I do feel like we've gotten a good amount of stuff done. Is it showdown time about this chart table?
It's drama in the boatyard.
Drama in the boatyard.
Or it has been.
Well, it's that time again. After 3 months of non-stop work on our Cape George cutter, it's time to review what has happened. I'm so happy. I'm Maya, and this is Aladino. We're restoring a Cape George Cutter 36, doing things like rebuilding the decks, the deck beams, the interior, the engine, and more or less everything else, with the aim to sail around the world. We're here!
You like to visit?
Mm-hmm. Ta-da! Just how we left it. 3 months ago, work was already well underway, but the boat still had some basic structures in place. The saloon had settees, and the head had a countertop of sorts, but all that quickly changed. During our time away from the boat, we had been stewing over what to do about the accursed balsa lining its hull. Unlike many sandwich core boats, this boat doesn't actually use balsa in a structural context. Instead, it was added on afterwards as a layer of insulation and then hastily fiberglassed over. The result, we suspected, was a leaky and rotten mess of balsa wood lining the hull. So we had to decide, should we choose to ignore it, or do we have to literally rip the very walls of this boat apart? Well, you can guess what we decided to do. The whole process is simple if not time-consuming. Cut the fiberglass off, peel it away, inspect the balsa, replace the rotten sections, and then re-fiberglass using epoxy this time and a better fiberglass cloth. This balsa has posed quite a conundrum for us, because as an insulative layer, it's not really that effective. But it will add stiffness to the hull, hopefully leading to a quieter and even stronger boat. And we hope it provides enough insulation to at least keep condensation at bay. But the real test will come when we're out sailing in cold climates, and who knows, maybe we'll have to add a layer of Armaflex afterwards. But that's a future problem. Meanwhile, above decks, some more exciting work was taking place.
So it's time to get these blocks all in place, and then I am pre-drilling all the holes.
The decks have been a big part of the refit story. When we bought the boat, water had seeped into the bulwarks, rotting many of the beams and blocking below. So we opened it all up, replaced many of the deck beams, and now we're in the process of closing things back up. We made this blocking last time we were at the boat, but now it's time to install it. With the blocking in place, we could finally start making the plywood pieces which will close the decks for good. Our decks are made with 2 layers of plywood. The first layer will fit neatly into the existing space, and then later on, we'll carve out a wider space so that the second layer can be staggered over top. Plywood shortages were a huge problem during this time, and the only good quality marine plywood we could find was akume, which is much lighter in color than the original stuff. We experimented with a stain to try and make it a bit closer, but in reality the match won't be perfect, and that will simply be a part of the boat's story.
So after making the first layer, I started with the second, and the idea with the second layer is to make it wider so that the plywood is staggered.
Aladino made some cuts in the top layer of the original plywood so that we could remove it and fit in the wider top pieces. The decks are nearing completion, a huge and momentous feeling since they were such a massive part of this refit. But the actual installation was still a few weeks away, and meanwhile, inside the boat, lots more was happening. Come have a look. Removing the icebox from the interior of the chart table. It was kind of a hellish job. I started it, and then I was kind of like this, I don't know how to proceed. But he basically had to cut out the fiberglass liner that was the icebox and then dig out all this foam.
And that thing was built like a tank.
Yeah. When I wasn't demolishing furniture, I was scraping the old paint off all the bulkheads, getting things ready for fresh epoxy primer and paint. Very soon we'd be turning the corner from demolition to construction, and that felt very exciting. The moment had finally come, the first fresh primer to be applied to the boat. Things were beginning to turn a corner, but there were still many more corners to come. Things were now getting finalized all over the boat. Epoxy and fiberglass started going up over the balsa, sealing everything back up. Varnish was applied to the underside of the plywood deck pieces, new paint was applied, old paint was removed. And then came one of the most momentous occasions of the whole 3-month work period.
It's time to permanently bond glue down the decks. It's my lucky day.
Da 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 da! I feel like we need a big fanfare. I'll have to put in some epic music in the editing. It's hard to overstate how much this meant to us. The decks and all of their underlying structures have been one of the single biggest projects we've undertaken on this boat, and closing them up for good with epoxy and screws felt like the closing of a big chapter. How's it going in here?
Pretty wonderful, actually, to be at this stage.
But when one chapter ends, another must begin, and Aladino wasted no time making sure that new chapter would get underway. Good morning. It's a very rainy day outside, and we're up here on the boat.
Project time!
Getting ready to start another very big project, because the decks are wrapping up, and so Aladino needs another big project to sink his teeth into.
Exactly, yes. It's time to open up another can of worms.
Yeah.
So,
To be fair, I think this can is already a bit half open.
it is open. Indeed, this can is already open.
All right, so time for some more destruction.
Exactly.
The cockpit came apart relatively quickly, and to Aladino's credit, it started to come back together again relatively quickly as well. Wow!
Is the whole thing on the image?
Yeah!
Now that shows you guys what made me fall in love with the lines of this boat. Look at these beautiful sections.
That is really gorgeous.
Alright, I finally got the bulkhead in there.
My parents even came to visit, and my dad helped with some of the new beams for the cockpit. And now, let's turn inside again. I hope you haven't forgotten yet about that chart table, all hollowed out and waiting for a new idea to take shape. Well, we decided to shorten the body of the table just a bit to give us some more room for our knees, and so we could extend the quarter berth just a little bit farther forward. We also had to fiberglass over the balsa. In fact, new fiberglass was getting applied everywhere. Soon there would be no more uncovered and untreated balsa left anywhere on the boat. Well, with one heartbreaking exception, but we'll get to that. On the whole, things were looking good. We were nearly ready to paint the whole interior. But as usual, we first got sidetracked with another project. Wow, Dean, it fits perfectly. Time to build new settees for the saloon. Aladino came up with a fast but beautiful building method, and they quickly took shape. The interior was coming along, and so was the cockpit, with new beams covered in primer and cockpit locker partitions getting finalized. The V-berth and the head got some shiny white paint over top of the epoxy primer, and we even spent a whole day in the boat playing with lights to try to come up with an interior lighting plan. Things felt really exciting, but of course, just when things feel like they're going a bit too smoothly, something happens just to restore the balance.
And all of a sudden, water starts spurting out at me. I thought things were turning around, but this is very, very disappointing.
Yeah, not good. Surprised I didn't cry yet.
Alright, I'm keeping this mask on because I just uncovered a whole bunch of mold. So, this was the balsa.
Wow!
I hate it.
We almost left this area. We've done so much of it.
And this is one of the worst we found.
Oh, this is absolutely the worst.
Yeah. Our initial plan was to actually leave the skeleton for the stove and the sink area intact. But now that we've uncovered all this rot, I think it's quite important to take it out.
With the disappointment of the galley weighing a bit heavy on us, we decided to turn our spirits around and do something that would yield quick and satisfying results. Like, for example, applying primer to the interior. Although this is still just a primer coat and there's a lot more to do, the interior instantly felt brighter and more spacious. Things were feeling better. Outside, the decks were closed and sanded and faired. The cockpit was nearly done, with all parts assembled, just waiting final installation. The settees are looking good, following their coats of epoxy. It's all happening, it's all coming together. It's a process, a long process, and it's a lot of work, but one day I think we will be happy we did it. But for now, it's time to say goodbye. We're leaving to head back to Europe for the summer, where the story will continue as we finish refitting our smaller boat there. Don't worry, it's not as big of a refit. And then we'll spend 2 months or so sailing around Scandinavia. Come the fall, we'll be back here with Magic Carpet 2, pressing onwards with the refit, ever closer to our dream of sailing around the world as slowly as possible. Huge thank you to everyone for watching, an extra big thanks to our patrons for making these episodes possible, and an extra big thanks to these folks who always go the extra mile to make sure that Magic Carpet keeps being produced. If you enjoy our episodes and would like to help support us making them, you can do so for as little as $2 a month, and in return there's lots of behind-the-scenes bonuses, such as real-time updates every week, since these videos are not in real time. So once again, huge thanks, and as always, we will see you next Friday.